And let's talk about funding those programs, because you have some controversial ideas about that too.
Let me emphasize one thing that Belle said before answering the question about funding, and that is we found that research shows that for both the K-12 level and the preschool level, probably the single most important ingredient is the teacher. And if you have high quality teachers that are experienced and know what they're doing, follow a good curriculum, and they're in an environment that supports teaching and instruction, then the kids can do better. And even low-income kids can do much better than they do under other circumstances. So part of the issue here is getting highly qualified teachers in these preschool programs and in the inner city public schools. That is a real problem in the United States. We have way too many underqualified and exhausted teachers that are not effective in the inner city. So we recommend in the book, and Belle and I both have supported this for years, we would pay them extra. If high quality teachers would work in the inner city, we would pay them extra. And that's, of course, an issue for some teachers' unions because you're labeling some teachers as more effective than others. But we still think it's important, and we would do it. The funding, in some ways, the most controversial part of our book is that we say flatly, Belle and I have both been involved for 6, 7, 8 years, even longer, in attempts to try to get the federal government to notice that they have a slight problem with a deficit. And you would think that you would be able to get their attention, that they would do something about this, because basically what's happening right now is that Americans are living on the income of our kids and grandchildren. That's exactly what we're doing. There's no other way to put it. And why would we continue to do that when we can see it's such a huge problem? And now we're going to have deficits of $1 trillion a year for the next 10 years. So Belle and I say flatly, we would not recommend these policies, which cost about $22 billion a year, unless we paid for them. So we suggest changes in current policy that would more than pay for the changes that we make. So it would be no net increase to taxpayers, but there would be changes in government programs over time. And in particular, we think that it makes sense, and we would like to have a national debate over this, that in the years ahead, we should spend, the rate of increase for spending on the elderly should be controlled, and that money should be invested in children. Now think of this. Not only would that more than pay for these programs, but if these programs work, as we're confident that they would, those kids would grow up with more skills, more talent, more ability. They would be more productive. Our economy would be larger. And we actually have analyses that actually show that this would happen. So there would be more money to run the government, more money to reinvest in programs like this. It makes sense. It's a reasonable bargain. But its political odds in Washington are whatever is less than zero.
Is that what you've gotten the most pushback on in the book?
We haven't gotten a lot of pushback on it yet, although Ron is absolutely right that politically it's very difficult to talk about programs like Medicare, like Social Security, which are extraordinarily popular, which have done a great deal to bring down poverty amongst the elderly, and therefore should be celebrated for that reason, but which are now slated to grow so much that they threaten to crowd out everything else in the federal budget. And so the younger generations are going to be hit with a double whammy. On the one hand, the programs they need are not going to be there, and on the other hand, they're going to be stuck paying the bills for the elderly population and for the deficits that we're creating. So we think that there is room to shift resources gradually over time. No, we're not talking about pulling the rug out from anybody who's currently retired, but gradually shift resources from the more affluent elderly to the less affluent amongst younger families and their children.
Let me draw attention to a particular part of this problem that's especially important. 20% of the children in America now are immigrants or children of immigrants. And they are behind in almost every measure. So think of this 50 years from now, that we're going to have a generation of immigrants who were behind from the very beginning for all the reasons that we described earlier. And they are going to be paying the taxes to support a wealthier set of elderly when they're grown. So we really need to focus on this group way more than we have. And this, of course, is very controversial politically as well. We had a very ugly debate last year about immigration. And this is where you can get town hall meetings with people yelling, screaming, jumping up and down, and all kinds of op-ed columns and radio programs and so forth that are completely unbalanced. And we're not focusing on the long term, which it's going to hurt all of us. It's not just about immigrants. It's about the whole country, because they're such an important part of the nation. I mean, we should do it on principle that we should help people. But in this case, it's in America's self-interest to pay particular attention to these children and to change the circumstances in which they are growing up now.
Does the economy now and the lack of jobs out there just exacerbate the problems?
It very much exacerbates the problems, and I think that when we talk in our book about the importance of education, work, and family, we're talking about a world in which jobs are available, in which we're not in a deep recession. Obviously, when you're in the kind of economy that we're sitting in right now, with unemployment in double digits, there aren't opportunities. There aren't opportunities for adults to work full-time. There aren't opportunities sometimes for them to work at all. And that has negative effects on family life. And the poverty rate is going up. In fact, we've done some projections recently at Brookings that shows, based on historical evidence of the relationship between unemployment and poverty, what the poverty rate is likely to be over the next few years, and it's scary stuff. So the good news is that recessions eventually come to an end. The bad news is that right now, all of the problems we're talking about are greatly exacerbated, and there isn't even as much opportunity as there normally is.
But in the long run, the American economy is a job machine. We will have a time like the 1990s. There's no reason to think we wouldn't. We always have in the past. We've recovered from everything in the past. And then granted, it's tough now, and the government is spending a lot of additional money now to try to help people through the misery. But the economy will get rolling again, and we will have a lot of jobs, and there'll be a lot of turnover. I mean, capitalist economies are very dynamic. And even now, there are a lot of people who find jobs. The economy still generates new jobs. It just loses more than it generates during a recession, so that's why unemployment goes up. But there's still a lot of people finding jobs, and the day will come when there'll be a job for almost everybody. If you interview the poor who don't work and you ask them why they don't work, very few of them, 10% or fewer, say because they couldn't find a job. They have all kinds of other reasons. So I think we should have very generous unemployment policies, as we do now. We've extended unemployment several times. We're spending billions and billions on unemployment, and we should have things like the stimulus package. We should do a lot of things like that. But in the long run, it's going to be, the economy will be recovered, we'll have a lot of jobs, and people who are prepared and looking for those jobs will be able to find work.